right, well, welcome everyone to this version of the Living Streams Church podcast. I'm David Stockton, and I got Anthony Canada with us, so I'm so excited for you guys to get to meet today, and actually all summer long. We're doing something different than we've normally done. We will still be doing some deep dives and talking a little bit about the sermon and some of those things off and on, but really this is a companion piece to this idea of being human that we're looking at in our Sunday sermons. But yeah, we're going to introduce you to some humans throughout the next 2 months as we do these podcasts. Anthony and I will be together on these things, and it'll be a lot of fun. We've been having lots of time together over the last few years doing walks along this golf course. We're actually sort of neighbors, and as we've been doing it, we've been talking a lot about life and maybe midlife. And career and work and faith and tech, a lot of tech, a lot of Twitter. I guess it's not Twitter anymore. A lot of X stuff going on in there. And just trying to really understand the time we're living in and manage our own souls and our families and our marriages and our work in light of all of those things, and hopefully trying to find some wisdom and spur one another on towards some of that. So I'm excited to be able to do that with a broader audience potentially. Not that we have it all together, have it all figured out, but we've enjoyed the camaraderie and the time together, and think it might be helpful for some others out there. So thanks for doing this, Anthony.
Of course.
Thanks for joining us. And yeah, so we're going to be doing different episodes each week along these lines. And why don't you start, just give a little bit of your hope and vision for this, and then I'll do the same as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think when you hear the title of the sermon series of the podcast, this idea of being human, feels like maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago that you would ask, like, why are we talking about our humanity, like at least in this context? Why are we asking some of these deeper questions? But having sort of grown up professionally in Silicon Valley and working in tech and, all things I think we'll talk about, someone who has tried to walk kind of the straight and narrow in a very secular industry, but also finding a lot of meaning in this idea of helping create the future, working in an innovative kind of opportunity or sector or career path, and feeling a sense of calling around that. It feels like the last 3 years with the advent of AI is really kind of challenging this notion of our humanity. And really, I don't mean this, and my hope for this podcast is not to portray AI as this sort of like completely negative, like horrible thing. I think there's a lot of good that will come from AI as well. But the reality is that it's forcing a lot of us to ask some pretty deep questions, whether you're a believer in Jesus or you're just one of the 1 billion knowledge workers in the world, people that are working in front of a computer all day. There's a disruption that is coming. There's a lot of uncertainty around, like, what does my job look like? Will I have a job? What does this mean for my sense of providership, or how I'll be able to contribute to the family? And maybe even some deeper existential questions of, what does work even mean? You see some of these, you mentioned the Twitter kind of posts, and people are like, we're going to live in a post-work society. Like, what does that even mean for people who care deeply about their work, and maybe they don't, intend to make work their identity, but really feel a sense of purpose around their contribution to God's kind of redemptive plan for the earth through their work. So I'm really excited, and I'm appreciative of the invitation to be a part of this. And I think the point that you kind of referenced earlier is a good one. I don't think we have all the answers, at least for some of the stuff, right? So much is late breaking, but creating a space to have conversation, to invite maybe even others that are around both the work kind of side, the theology side, the tech and innovation side as well. And just trying to have a conversation where we learn together in public on what this means for us as believers in this time and place. And I'm hopeful that I think we'll get to some really interesting kind of ideas on the other side of it, some breakthrough.
Totally. The thing that I've kind of been keeping in mind is it's such a vast, like, well, cosmos, but even just the technology reality of, the general, the open, the AI, the agent, like all these different morphings that are happening. Obviously, the world's a big place. There's a lot of different thoughts, a lot of different theories. There's multiple faiths. There's endless amounts of careers. So it's funny. I sometimes get overwhelmed. I'm thinking, like, how am I supposed to even get my mind around all this stuff? But what I've just said is, like, well, if I just root myself in a biblical anthropology, like if I can really understand what the Bible teaches as human, and what the Bible teaches as human flourishing. It's like those two words, like human and flourishing. If I can figure out what the Bible has to say about those things, then I feel like I'll be able to navigate whatever comes. Because some of
Yeah.
the technology kind of is a flash in the pan, right? Like it comes,
Yeah.
and like we talk about the .com bubble that burst or whatever. Like,
Yeah.
and obviously there's some remnant of all of those things, no doubt about it. But it wasn't all that everyone thought it was going to be. Or it was
Yeah.
it was a minor disruption, not a major one. Now, artificial intelligence seems a little different, a little more
Yeah.
robust than some of that. But at the
Yeah.
same time, there will be things that kind of spike and fall. I mean, we joked about the young people and all their commencement addresses. If a commencement speaker started to talk about AI, they just started booing them right away. Which I think is actually hilarious, because I think they're saying, "Hey, let us write the future. Like, don't tell us exactly what's going to happen." And I love a lot of that spirit. Like, if we're going to have to be smarter and tougher, we're going to be smarter and tougher. Like, I love a little bit of that, even though there might be some ignorance in that.
Yeah.
But I just think if we can root ourselves in the stuff that has proven itself over and over and over, no matter what technological advances have come in human history, no matter what threats have come to humanity. The two things that we're talking about in the sermon series is yes, the artificial intelligence reality of that technology, and how it can be disorienting unless we have a real good compass, unless we have a real good guideline. But I think there's just we're hopefully going to have a lot of at least camaraderie and companionship for people who are in that space and trying to figure out how to, muddle their way forward. And hopefully, with some of the speakers that we'll bring in and some of the work that we're doing, we'll actually be able to bring some treasures of wisdom to help. But I know we're living it too. So there's something fun about that. It's like we're in the lab right now.
Yeah.
And that's what this podcast is supposed to be, is a little bit of like, let's get in the lab, let's learn, let's test, let's prove, and then let's share, see what happens.
Yeah. I think what's cool about that is, to some extent, this is the first time in history that everyone's in the lab. Like, no one has, at least from the AI perspective, certainly, a lot to figure out on the other end. But even the folks kind of building the tools are saying, like, look, like, we need to put guardrails in place, so on and so forth. But even the sharpest voices in the heart of Silicon Valley that are building these things are asking questions and are kind of, creating spaces for conversations like this one. So I'm really excited to be approaching the conversation from a biblical point of view and to kind of unpack it together in that way.
There was one article that I read. It was from Axios, and in it, they were describing this cultural moment, and they said basically, in some metrics, like, the life expectancy in America is more than it's ever been. The accumulation of wealth in America is more than it's ever been. And there was just all these metrics that were just saying, this is an absolutely amazing time to be a human, particularly in America. And yet, all of these Gallup polls and all of these, they did a study at University of Michigan, and everyone's going, things aren't good. Things are getting worse. And, it's going to be hard for everyone. And it was like, there's this gap between, reality and then feeling. And I think that sense of feeling, or that it's not that that's not real. It is real. I think everyone's kind of going, something's not quite right. Even though you're telling me it's okay, something is not okay. And it might be more inside the human soul than it is actually, in society. But either way, they said that they called us the rattled generation. And I think this is, playing off a little bit of the anxious generation that Jonathan Haidt in his book. He described COVID wiping out all of our resilience. Like it used up all of our coping mechanisms. And it was like, but we needed those to go through this digital disruption. But we don't have anything. Like, well, there's nothing left in the tank. And so a lot of us are just kind of like, whoa, just trying to float through and say, hey, we don't feel, what they said was we're too unsteady and too uncertain to even know if something is good or not right now. And again, I just feel like that there's a lot of people in that. And I remember actually the first time we went for a walk, that was a little bit of what you were trying to describe. You're like, I don't know if like I'm having like some anxiety. I'm having some just like there's some stuff inside of me. And when I look outside, like everything's okay. But I've had I almost, it's not a dread. Dread's probably too powerful of a word, but it's like just this sense that like I don't know, man. I just don't know if I'm on the right track. I don't know if something serious is coming, and I kind of have this sense about it. But I think there's a lot of people that could really relate to that, and so we want to go right into that, and not solve it, but like kind of give some companionship, give them some camaraderie, and work our way through it. And I loved you actually said that you want to, before you even leave this space, you want to figure out how to help as many people in this space as possible. Which I love that. I love that. I'm so excited about you guys getting to know Anthony more. And so let's get into your story. Let's get the origin story of Anthony Kanata. And let's start with work. So I'll just frame it real quick for us. We've continued to talk about the intersection of work and tech and faith. And that's really where we want to live at that intersection, because that intersection is it's kind of like been a crash, for a lot of people. And in your life, that's kind of where you were going real good, things were going strong, and then all of a sudden, a little bit of those three things converged, and you've been kind of going, okay, hold on, I need to figure this out. And so that intersection of work and tech and faith. So first of all, give us a little bit of your work story, and then we'll get your tech story and your faith story.
Well, and even just to touch on, you mentioned anxiety. And so I think that the context by which I even have attempted to approach my career, I think is rooted in growing up as an only child, divorced parents. So really kind of, mostly raised by my mom, from another culture who immigrated here to the US. And so a lot of dynamics. And I think the biggest one in play for my career mostly is not a lot of great models of like what it meant to be an executive or a professional or even a father or a husband or a man. And so that did, I think, two things for me that fed into my career. One really good, and one that I'm paying off a little bit now in my mental health, maybe more than one. On the professional side, it put this chip on my shoulder because I think, and I don't know if this resonates with others that might have had a similar upbringing or background. My like operating system, my gut orientation was around, I'm going to prove that I can do it without a model. I'm going to do it my way or whatever the case is, right? And so it fed this like really strong sense of ambition and really wanted me to, it drove me forward to really try to build something build a family, to build a career and so on. The shadow side, of course, is like an immense amount of anxiety along the way, which we'll talk about. We've talked about a lot on our walks. Yeah. And so I do think for folks, again, who feel very career driven, oftentimes there is this shadow side of your mental health and your well-being. And so I want to kind of acknowledge that as we kind of go forward through my story, which by the way is meant to not be just, I think, about me, but just, I assume this is something that others have felt too.
The humanity.
Right. Yeah. The humanity of it all. And so I kind of punched above my weight and got into a college that was really good. graduated into the workforce, and I found myself at 21 years old in Silicon Valley. I moved from LA, kind of where I'm from originally, and I got a very entry level job. But what I didn't know at the time was that the company that was really helping, one of the few companies really helping drive a major kind of technology platform shift. Was called Box, and at the time we were kind of still selling software. For those that can remember it, on premise is the word we use in the industry. Or if anyone remembers going to Best Buy and buying like boxes of CDs of software to install, like we had this like physical component to technology, and it was moving to the cloud where everything was available on our mobile phones, right, from any device and so on. And so I had a chance to kind of see this major technology shift, which of course comes into play today. But I was also like the first 40 employees at this company called Box, and it was incredible. It felt like, kind of at the time, at least being very young, kind of the golden era of Silicon Valley, at least through my kind of experience of it. And so that, had a really good run there, leveraged that experience. I think for a lot of folks, especially if you're early career, getting like a great logo on your resume early is important. It's good. It's really good leverage. Even if the role wasn't like amazing, you can really tell a story around it. So I tried to leverage that experience at Box and joined another company called Live Office. We ended up selling that to a big company called Symantec. I worked at Symantec was a massive kind of Fortune 500 company, at least at the time. And a really interesting turn of events happened where my boss, my boss's boss, and my boss's boss all left around the same time. And so at like 23 years old, I had a chance to like report basically 1 degree removed from the CEO of this Fortune 500 company. So it was an incredible experience, and a really good story for your career, which again, I think, this idea of storytelling, I think, keeps coming into play. But that all set the stage for me to get what ended up becoming sort of this big opportunity, which was to come in very early at a startup that was pre-revenue, just kind of getting started, all kind of in the same broad space of enterprise software. The company that would be called Gainsight. And again, super, super early. But over the course of 7 years, we built that business from, again, pre-revenue to about 100 million of recurring revenue. We ended up selling the company for over $1 billion in 2020. We ended up creating kind of a movement behind software, which sounds like a thing a marketer might say. But truly, like, we focus on how can we serve this persona that exists within a company that no one is paying attention to, and how can we resource them with like content to help them do their job better, community so they feel just a little bit less alone. And the bet was, if we can serve them, can we build a great software company on the back of it? And so that approach became novel, and it wasn't this like, really thing that we went into it thinking, okay, we should basically run this play. It was a set of accidents. But ultimately, I think that and great execution across the company ended up leading us to having this really good exit in 2020. And so I had a chance to write a book about that playbook called Category Creation. And so all this to be said, from the professional context, I am now at that point 10 to 12 years into my career, and seemingly, at least, maybe not the absolute pinnacle of Silicon Valley, but I can sort of tell a story to that little boy, at least, who, again, didn't have that model, that I made it, whatever that means, right? I sort of like made it. And throughout that journey, one thing that I'm sort of like grateful for is I've tried to, again, there wasn't this sort of like losing of my faith. There wasn't this stepping away. And I've always tried to keep this kind of tension of work as idolatry or workaholism or whatever to almost a healthy balance of how I approached work, where it wasn't my identity, but it was truly a part of my purpose. That Silicon Valley in and of itself, which a lot I can talk about here, isn't this dark kind of secular industry. I mean, it could be through one interpretation. Through another, it's a mission field, and it's a chance for me to like both implicitly and explicitly model my faith in this practice. And so I shared that because my intentions were pure, right? And it's a struggle, and not everyone. I don't think anyone gets it 100% right the whole time, but that was certainly something that was building. And so after that, I'll speed up the story. A couple other CMO roles, leading marketing teams, and then I felt this true sense of vocational calling, at least, to start a company. And so, for whatever reason, it might be, again, that same kid who is trying to like prove something to other people. I don't know. But I wasn't like, the risk of like going all in and being an entrepreneur and starting a company didn't really faze me. In fact, it excited me quite a bit. And so I had this concept for a technology product. We raised about $12 million over 2 rounds from really great investors. Like, again, all the momentum was there to build something great. And I think this is where we start to approach the intersection a little bit of the story. But the quick version, and then I'm happy to kind of zoom in anywhere here, is 3 years in. As many entrepreneurs know, it's not easy, but it ended up failing. Like, we ended up not reaching our fullest potential, which would have been enough. Like, that was enough to stress anyone. I think this idea of failure, like, what do we do next? But in that 3-year window where I sort of got off of the career path of being a CMO, became an entrepreneur, founder, failed, a lot happened. ChatGPT came out, right? This was November of 2023, I believe, when ChatGPT first came out. Might have been 22. The entire role of the CMO has changed, where now we were less sort of these executives, these leaders of people that were kind of guiding vision and then hiring a team to go execute. The expectation was we would roll up our sleeves and do the work as well. We'd be familiar with the tools. There's sort of like there's a term in tech right now around 996 that we would be working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week is effectively like the buzzword around that expectation, which, again, not everyone I think wholly subscribes to, but I think is certainly a thing. Beyond that, I'm very, I'm in Phoenix, and I'm, of course, a member of Living Streams. And the world started shifting back, at least from a technology perspective, back in the office. And so now I wasn't carving my own path to start a company here in Phoenix, and my family can, continue to be a part of the Living Streams community and our school communities and all these things. There was a growing expectation that if I wanted to attempt to get back to the top of that CMO rung, I have to move back to San Francisco. And so all of this sort of has led to this kind of existential conversation around, wait a minute, like, what am I doing? And you hit the note earlier. I'm approaching 40 this year. And so that's kind of another big kind of conversation. Like, how do I think about the next kind of season of life, and how does work fit into that? And, again, we had a good exit in 2020, but I got a lot more contribution to make to the family for us to, it's not like it was that great of an exit. So I share all that to say, and I've skipped over so much, of course, but I now, as someone who seemingly, again, quote unquote, made it 5 years ago, 6 years ago, am facing this moment with uncertainty and doubt and a lot more questions than answers. Not because, again, working in technology, AI is exciting. I think there's a lot of parts of it that are extremely exciting. But finding my own way in where I fit in this movement or in this kind of season of our industry is not clear. So that's it at a high level.
Yeah. Well, I think, I mean, I love that. And that's the background, that so much of this makes sense is because you kind of had that career path, and you had that I guess in it, you probably weren't even thinking about, like, where is all this going, or how long is this going to last? I mean, you were just building, and you were just living into calling, and your gifts were being used, and your gifts were being developed at the same time and getting honed and sharpened, and then I think that's that. Well, and it's funny because you described being the marketer as a part of a team, and then actually kind of being the leader of the team and carrying all the other weights of, a CEO or a founder. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's like those are such different worlds
Totally
in
different.
some ways. And 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 I think, one of the questions I had was, so at what point, like with your tech story, like at what point did tech enhance but then start to interfere? And so, you had this trajectory, and I know that you have some family stuff that kind of went on during that time as well. And you were, all of our conversations through there was like, do I move back to San Francisco? What's best for my family? And trying to navigate that, and how do you like pay the bills? But then you even talked about like, well, do we just downsize? Do we, like, you were just going through a lot of different options to try and figure out what the next thing was. But a lot of that had to do with, because now all of your skill set, you were trying to be honest to yourself, and you could have gone and sold yourself and said, hey, you need me to do all this marketing. But the truth was, no, you just need a better understanding of Claude, or you just need
Yeah.
to know how to use the tools better. And you actually said multiple times you could hire some 22-year-old that
Mm.
that knows how to navigate AI, and you could pay them less, and they could do almost the same job. Now you have experience in kind of like a aesthetic and all those things, and you're really
Yeah.
good at what you do. But that was like, you were trying to stay honest to yourself and say, well, tech really has completely almost pulled the rug out from underneath
Yeah.
what we were doing. So describe a little bit of that crash. Like, you're on your
Yeah.
track, and then you tried to do the CEO thing, but it was like you just haven't been able to really figure out how to go forward, because tech, every time there's like an opportunity, it's like, well, if someone really knew how to use tech, they could just use that. And it's hard to get excited about that. Like, I'm just trying to compete against tech for a job. No, I don't want to do that.
It's crazy. Yeah. No, I mean, I think, um, I think that until 2022 or 2023, when we say tech, what we really mean is we're building software that enables humans to do work more efficiently, right? At least in the work kind of enterprise context. Um, the big shift that happened while I was building software for humans to do work was now the technology and the software was doing the actual work. The actual units of work that had to happen, we can now basically train an agent on top of a model, um, try to codify a lot of our experience or best practices or processes of what good looks like, and allow that agent to actually execute the work. And so that in and of itself, I won't say it's what killed my company, but it's that over the long arc of time, if you zoom out and forget about all the mistakes we made and everything, which were plenty, that's the existential threat. Is like, I was building software for another generation, basically, that doesn't exist anymore. On the note of like the work, it's really interesting because the age thing you referenced is actually very true. In that I started to experience a bit of bias as well around like, oh, you're not 17 or 17, what's a proper age? 19, living in San Francisco, like not even Palo Alto, like San Francisco, Soma, like literally like in the heart of it, with 415 area code, working 7 days a week. And if you're building software in this other market and you have a family and you care about boundaries, like all these things, we're going to write the check for the other person, right?
Yeah.
And so you start to see kind of the pattern matching happening for companies that are getting funded. And you're like, gosh, these are all like at 39, am I too old to start a company? I thought this was like right in the heart of it. So there was a little bit of that, I think, going on. I will say that I do think there's, I don't think this is just like me trying to be overly optimistic, but I will say it's important to like separate hype from reality. And sometimes I think in the season we're on right now, hype sometimes wins. But I do think like I'm long-term optimistic, right? That marketers actually have certain types of marketers actually have quite a bit of role to play. And the way I think about it, sort of the front end and back end of AI or agentic work. The front end is you got to ask the right questions, kind of like we're doing on this podcast, right? We have to know what to ask. And that doesn't come from random acts of, marketing or whatever, that comes from wisdom, from being it, which is different than knowledge. If knowledge is put in the box, experience, wisdom is what enables us to prompt the thing with the right questions. It also, we need to make sure that the thing, that the whether it's Claude or whatever we're using, has the right data and governance and all these things. So it's using the context in the right way to make the right decisions. And then I think on the other end, how many of us have been on the other side of a ChatGPT output or whatever, and we're like, that's not even close to what I thought, was good or whatever. How do you then sort of follow up and sort of use taste as the language that the industry has really adopted to kind of drive it home to the finish line? But besides the point, I don't want, no, we can talk optimism later.
I got a question on that. I've heard you use the phrase AI slop.
Yeah.
And I think that I think we're already, I mean, it's so brand new, but we're already to the point where like an Instagram feed, like you see something, you're like, that's AI generated. And you're like, yeah, like even if it's better than something else, there's just something inside you that just dies a little. And I think whatever, like, so describe a little bit of that moment, because I think obviously on the output, like you're describing, there's already a distaste for something that is AI, yet there's an honesty saying it's better. Like it's cleaner, it's crisper, it's more to the point. Like no one's saying it's not better, but it's just not interesting. And it's almost, I mean, maybe, but there's a market for pop music, right? There's a market for fast food that is really strong, even though everyone might say we still like the other stuff better. There's still vast, like people making a lot of money in fast food and pop music. So I don't know, like describe that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to your point about the anxious generation or the rattled generation. Because I think the point's good. Like there's a lot of, again, efficiency in our world, right? I'm less on the consumer side of tech. There's a lot of like, you can move faster, you can cover more ground, you can do a lot of great things with it. I think the reality is when we log on to our devices now, we don't know what's real anymore. And that is at the fundamental, like heart level or mental health level, at least, where we feel this sense of numbness almost, where we can see, first of all, like the level of access we have on social media is insane. We're seeing things we should never see. We're part of the 24/7 kind of news cycle. It's interruptive. We're getting push notifications for everything. But now we don't even know if the things that we're seeing are actually even real. Yeah. So no, it's not a surprise that we're feeling this sense of numbness, I think collectively, as at least my generation is. And so I think that's kind of part of it, is there's almost this like desire or heart for human created stuff, to celebrate humanity. Like humanity becomes a premium as from a marketing point of view in the future, because it's not slop. It's not, cheaply executed like things. There's this degree of like curation and feeling a sense of, someone put a lot of thought and energy into creating something. So I do think the pendulum is starting to swing. We see it with in-person events and communities as well, where, we went from a world where we can just, FaceTime anyone or create a Zoom meeting or whatever, to being able to actually get in front of other people and create this sense of belonging that you just can't replicate online. Yeah. So I'm hopeful that there's a swing back to the analog throughout all of this. But I wanted to share a quick example of maybe one that sort of walks the line here. Did you hear the Puerto Rico song that went kind of viral for a hot minute? You didn't hear this? So, okay. There's a creator who basically travels to these cities, and then he's a comedian, writes songs about different cities, and he's actually crafting the lyrics himself, but then he feeds it into this AI tool called Sona or something along those lines, and it'll generate a super poppy or whatever genre song using his lyrics. And so this song just took off about San Juan, Puerto Rico, and a trip that he took. And what was interesting about in the debate in culture and in social media was it's all AI. Like the vocals, the music, all of it is not real. There was no musician that actually generated it, but we love the song. How do we feel about that? And the argument that I thought was well placed was, well, you've got this comedian, creator, writer who actually wrote every word of this. And so all of that kind of humanity came in and sort of like the forefront of that process. He used the technology to produce and generate, and surely there must have been different iterations of it along the way. But then he filmed all the content and put a video together that he distributed to his audience. So then on the back end, the humanity kind of came in as well. And so I wonder if there's a middle ground here over time too, where we're leveraging the technology strategically, but not just prompting content, publishing whatever they see, and then getting lost in this sort of like fake, cheap level of content that
like
I think we're seeing a lot of today.
Nobody wants to know what AI thinks. I mean, unless you're like, what's the capital of, some random country.
Right.
And so in that example, it's interesting because he had a lived experience. He was in San Juan. He was experiencing it, and he was writing and recording his real human experience, the organic experience of it all. And then, as far as how it got to the masses, had some assistance in that. And then I don't know the video things, but I like that. It's funny. I had an example just the other day. Our youth pastor was going to share in one of our services. And so we were working together on his message. And I was like, okay, well, why don't you craft something, kind of an outline, and send it to me, and then we can talk it through. And when he sent it to me, I was like, I read it, and then we got on a FaceTime call, and I said, and this is the first time I've ever done this. My first question to him was, I said, okay, can you just tell me, and I said, it's really not a big deal either way, like how much AI was used in creating this. And I wasn't a judgment. I literally was not saying, if you used AI, you're busted or whatever. And he said, well, I wrote down all these things, but I did ask it to kind of organize the pattern of thought. And it was funny because I said, that's perfect. Thank you so much. Because now I know how to interact with you in this piece, because I'll know more what's you and what was helped. And so literally the organization of the thought pattern was very good. So I thought, this actually flows really well. But he got help with that. And again, that's nothing wrong. He might have been able to come up with it on his own, but as far as the material and as far as the stories, as far as what he was trying to bring out, this was all his. But it was so funny because I just was like, before I even start talking to you about this, I just need to know. And I thought, that's interesting. That's telling, because it's so prevalent now that we're aware it's there. I mean, my wife's a teacher in a school too, so she has this funny relationship. She actually thinks AI is great, but she also is like, why are we giving kids homework? It makes no sense to give a kid homework because they just go home and AI will either teach them the stuff that I was supposed to teach them and must not have done a good job, or they'll just have AI do it and then say, and make sure it's not good enough, make sure it mess it up a little bit so my teacher knows it's me, and AI can do that too. So it's not, she's like, I'm not going to ultimately be able to tell. Like, AI can outsmart me. She's like, so why are we doing homework?
Yeah. It's a good theological question though. Like, going back to your prompting about technology, and like, I'd love to get your take on it. When we think about AI, is not the first like disruptive technology that we've implemented and integrated into how we live and work. Social media has a lot of bad things with it, and I think well documented, well discussed, a lot of bad contribution to it. Here we are on a podcast creating content that we're going to distribute on social media and cast a wide net to get a lot of people to hear, hopefully, some nuggets of wisdom or value, or feel maybe a little less alone when with their own kind of struggle or journey. You could argue like computers have brought a lot of, or laptops or personal at-home computers or phones or whatever, have brought a lot of access to things that a lot of young people shouldn't see, older people shouldn't see, right? But they've enabled us to write our sermons, right? Versus like handwriting everything, right? There's like value to technology. And so I'm curious, obviously this is slightly different in that AI has this sort of ability to, like, we've never used the word knowledge before, I think, in context of technology in this way, but is there any, guidance that you would have from a theological lens, even on how to maybe approach kind of a healthy relationship with technology, knowing that this isn't
Well,
the
digital
first?
discipline, right? That's the phrase. Like how do we have the correct digital discipline? And I mean, it always comes down to self-discipline. I think self-control. It's one of the fruits of the spirit. It's at the end of the list. So we usually talk about love, joy, and peace, but the last one is self-control. And I think with any technology, with any advancement, with anything, we can overdo it. It can become an idol. It can become something that is we're relying on too much or whatever. And so I just think that there just needs to be a healthy amount of discipline. So you talk about social media, and like the scrolling and all those things. It's like, well, there's lots of studies to show that too much of that's really bad. There was lots of studies to show that too much, alcohol or cigarettes or coffee is really bad. So everything just requires, a certain amount of self-control so that we're not overdoing it. But when it comes to technology and AI, I mean, yeah, I think we have no idea the full ramifications, but we know it seems major. And when I think about this high school pastor who's using AI to help organize his thoughts, maybe he knows that that's one of the things that he's not the strongest at, and so he can use it to help him so that more students can kind of follow his train of thought and it can be a better thing. I mean, I have no
Totally.
problem with that. Now, but he can't hide behind that, or he can't, like, I love, all those political commercials where they're like, I'm this person and I approve this message.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
it's like, well, how do we know that's you? It's so funny, but
Yeah.
they're trying to show like this isn't just something that was created and I had nothing to do with. But it's funny. It's like, how do I know that that's not just an AI
Yeah.
creation of you saying that, which I'm sure many times it is, or like a signature, right? Like this
Sure.
auto signature that people have. So I think that we do have to ask questions. We do have to hunger for authenticity. We do have to just know what it is, and if we're like processing something that's artificially created, artificial intelligence, just know what that is. I do think one of the Pope Leo the 14th, his encyclical just came out, which is basically he's saying to all the priests of the world, which there's a lot of those. And he's saying, this is the stuff I want you to be focusing on as you pastor your people. And one of it was really, I mean, he's basically warning against AI. And
Yeah.
and I don't, I mean, again, I think AI is just, it's a human tool that's been
Yeah.
created by humans that will either help humans, but it also can have a shadow side, like you said.
Yeah.
But
I
his
love
warning
that
was
framing.
that it would erode human judgment. And that's the one that just is scary to me. And I think a bit what we were talking about before, like we've created a hunger in America for fast food. Like a Taco Bell taco, it's not the greatest taco. Or that bean burrito. It's not there, but whatever that bean burrito taste is, it's just like, this is great. Now, if you want a bean burrito, and like you don't go to Taco Bell, you go to something that's more authentic. But if you want a Taco Bell bean burrito, there's nothing like it. The softness of that tortilla and the right amount of beans, and it's so funny. Like it's just so good and so cheap.
Yeah.
And we now have developed a taste for that.
Yes.
My wife has developed a taste for Diet Coke. It is a
Yeah.
disgusting, brew of chemicals, but whatever it is, it's like there's no calories or whatever she
Yeah.
likes about it. The ice, the cold, the summer in Phoenix. So last night we were out there, the two of us, and we both got Diet Cokes. I don't even like Diet
Yeah.
Coke, but I like my wife, so we're just drinking Diet Cokes out there. And I think we do have to be careful that we don't like erode our ability to know what's real,
Yeah.
to know what's true. We
Yeah.
can't allow something else to dictate what is true, what is good, what is right, what is real to
Yes.
us. And so that's where I love I'm just not afraid of humanity losing that. I think we have the Spirit of God
Yeah.
inside of us. So the fact that AI is producing these really cool, amazing, when I see them and many people see them, you go, "Ugh, I'm not interested in that. It's too clean.
Yeah.
It's too perfect. It's not real."
Yeah.
And I just think that humanity is always going to have that, like art.
Yeah.
There's always
Yeah.
been art. There's always been a hunger for art, and then human connection. I just there's never going to be, and people are going to AI for counseling and things like that, which is wild. And sometimes I can understand it because it can help you think a little clearer, like more logically, but but it's never going to be able to place like eye to eye, face to face. I actually heard someone talking a study that was done on even like FaceTime, like what we're doing. Like I can see your face, I can see your eyes, but if you take two people and like, and I think it was like 15 inches, there was something about inside 15 inches, and the amount of like, I forget what there's like dopamine, and then there's another chemical that's like you're totally safe and secure. I forget what it's called right now. But he said that whenever you're 15 inches away from someone face to face, like that, the spike in that is just something. And so there's never going to be able to be like an artificial reality to that, because that's our humanity. We're human, and we're made in the image of God. And so in some ways, like I'm not afraid of all of this stuff. Yet I do know we need to have self-discipline. We can give up things, but I don't think anything
Yeah.
can take it away from us.
Right.
You can't take the image of God, the fact that we're made in His likeness, and that we are creators, and we are
Yeah.
connoisseurs, and those type of things were good. And I do think we need to grow those appetites. I think they can be dumbed down. Like I think the erosion of human judgment has happened through social media. I mean, the amount of like dumbness out there in some ways is at an all-time high. So I think we do have to be careful of that. But I think it's just a matter of making sure we, root ourselves in things like Scripture, root ourselves in things like community, and root ourselves in what we know is beautiful and good and right. I think goodness, truth, and beauty. Those are three things that philosophers would always come back to, and I think that's the same thing now. That goodness, truth, and beauty it's a divine thing. It's something that God infused into the world, and so AI is made in our image, in the image of humanity, and it can parrot goodness, truth, and beauty, but it can't really create it or know it in the way that we can. And so I think we do have to continue to do that. I mean, that's where it's funny. My kids is like, why they classical music, even like classical, like old rock or something. They're always like, ah, and it's like, no, because you have that brain rot, And I'm joking about that or whatever. But I do think it's
Yeah.
it's important to continue to like try and mature our judgment, our palate for truth and goodness and beauty.
I think that's right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, tell us a little bit about your faith real quick. I mean, we're gonna wrap up here not too long, but I want to finish this
Yeah.
first episode really getting a good introduction to you, because we have a lot more stuff to do in these next
Yeah. Yeah.
episodes. But as far as that intersection of work, we kind of got your work story, and then
Yep.
we got a little bit of the tech kind of enhancement and interference. But just give us a little bit about your faith, your testimony, how you
Yeah.
came to faith, and how it's both enhanced and interfered in your kind
Yeah.
of story and life.
Yeah. So much to say. I mean, I grew up again. My mom immigrated here from Lebanon, and so we grew up in a Greek Orthodox context. And actually, I went to Greek school. If anyone's ever watched like My Big Fat Greek Wedding, like that was basically the first 10, 12 years of my life. And so, really like appreciate so much of the Orthodox faith and so many things about it. But I'd say I really came into a faith of my own in high school. I went to a Baptist high school and just started kind of, you know, discovering this idea of knowing Jesus personally, having a personal relationship with him, and that kind of changed my life. Not kind of, it absolutely changed my life. And then obviously went on to Pepperdine in college. And so I think like a lot of, again, the foundation was set from my mom grew up in a prayerful home and all of that. But I sort of had to work it out on my own, kind of growing up, much like we all do. And it was really interesting because Silicon Valley, again, my first experience of it in, call it 2009, 2010, was, gosh, it's such a dark place. You could, um, hopefully this isn't like a controversial thing to say, but it felt like you could be anything you want and believe anything you want in Silicon Valley, except a Christian, because that came with certain connotation, right? Or certain judgments or whatever. And so I felt like many others, I had to almost like keep my faith to myself and not share it very well. And so I started wrestling with like a lot of Tim Keller, like Reason for God type of literature, just because this felt like the center of the world, intellectually at least, and it felt like there was so much kind of reason and science and philosophy going into how their worldview was being shaped, and I didn't, I yearned for that level of um, depth of conversation around the faith that we know and believe. And so it was incredible. And I think I had a lot of breakthrough there. And it was really throughout my time then, really starting at Gainsight, I started to just be a little bit more public with my faith. And a little more public is not like a major act of courage, but I put like follower of Jesus on my Twitter bio or something along those lines, right? Nothing crazy. My like whatever on the website, like with wherever my bio was. But what was interesting is like that little, like whatever that is, like 25 characters or whatever, sparked so many conversations with people who felt that same like degree of keeping their faith to themselves or feeling like they had to in order to actually like build a career in tech. They felt this sense of relief, like, oh gosh, like I'm not the only one, like there's others. And a lot of folks would reach out, have incredible conversations, built a lot of amazing relationships through it. And so I do feel this, like what God was doing at the time was really planting some seeds of this, I don't know, desire to help disciple other Christian entrepreneurs, executives, whoever, operators, folks working in technology that, again, might hear a podcast like this and wrestle with a lot of the same things we're wrestling with. And so one of the things I did, and you've been such a huge part of this for me, is I actually applied to seminary in this moment of like, what am I doing with my life? My midlife crisis was I now go to Fuller, and three courses in. It's been amazing and beautiful, and I'm doing it very part-time, but I'm finding such great gratitude. I have a lot of gratitude for it as I'm trying to edify myself theologically for whatever it is God wants to do with this. I have no idea. If it's nothing but this podcast, hopefully it'd be enough, right? And so I would say that's kind of like the long arc of the story. But zooming in a little bit to just that intersection where a lot of the stuff and my company, Audience Plus, that did work out came together. And I think you know this well. I had like, it's almost like when you start a company, you're getting on like the radar of spiritual warfare. It feels like, I don't know if that's true for everyone, but I had just about everything bad happen to me in my life in that 3-year window. A little exaggerating here, but at 33, my heart went out of rhythm and I developed AFib, which is very common arrhythmia, but not for somebody in their early 30s. Because of that stress, I developed vitiligo. And so my skin is literally changing colors as a result of like autoimmune kind of driven from stress and anxiety. My daughter, Sienna, had several unexplained seizures, which to some extent has gotten better. For anyone, parents of small children who have seen seizures, it's obviously like, thank God she's okay. But like visually, like that experience of watching your child seize is like one of the worst things you can possibly see. You know the story very well, but we actually had my wife, Brittany, was pregnant with a third child who we lost in a very like hard way of hope and trying to figure out how to protect Brittany's health while also saving the child. And at the end of the story, we did lose the child, unfortunately, but we kept Brittany. Like she survived, and today is doing good. So like that's just like a handful of things coming to mind that all happened all in that same season. And I had to go to work that next day, right? Or whatever it was, and try to like partition that off. And so part of the end result is I've now that anxiety sort of I said that I grew up with lifelong, kind of from maybe my family of origin and all of that, has really kicked into a new gear. Um, and it's really around this idea of like loss of control and health stuff. Like it sounds silly, but like flying, I fly all the time, but I hate it because I'm terrified. Um, and so it is this big theological faith kind of moment that I'm in right now of like, how do I wrestle with surrender in a season of industry and life and culture, but even in my own personal context, where I'm waking up to the idea I have no control. And all of us, right? That's the human story. And so a big part of my faith journey today, it's buzzy to say that or whatever, is sort of trying to mature in my faith to give up more, willfully give up control to God, offer it to him, which often feels like swimming against the current of my neural pathways and nervous system and these types of things. And so that's my struggle.
Yeah. Well, it's yeah. I mean, I remember when you called me and you said, "Hey, the doctor said I've got to decide between the baby and my wife," and it ended up being to where the decision was made for you,
Yeah.
in some sort of, in some sort of transcendent like grace.
Yeah.
That, but still, all the heartbreak. And I remember we just kept praying, Lord, we just put this baby in your hands. Like that's all we know to do. And yeah, and I think that whole idea of okay, I can't figure this one out. I can't flex hard enough to make this work. Um, and we get hit by those things. And yeah, it's funny because when Jesus said, if you're heavy and like loaded with a heavy burden, if you're tired from working so hard, come to me and I will give you rest. And it's like, we want solutions. We want
Yeah.
fixes. And he says, no, I'm just going to give you rest. And when you were talking about that, like willfully trying to surrender, and so, like, because you have to, like, at the end of the day, you're going to surrender. Like, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
I mean, at least death takes us all, right? So the final reality of humanity is surrendering. Like, it's giving up. But how do we willfully surrender before that we're forced to, and find the peace that's there? And I was just thinking about this river, and in some ways, like, we're in this river, and you were talking about swimming against the current in some ways, but in some ways, like, God's got a plan for our lives, and we're moving through these chapters, and the book is already written. He's the author and perfecter of our faith, and he knows what each chapter needs for our faith to mature, and he just continues to set the stage in the background and to move us through these chapters. And if we can trust him,
Yeah.
then we continue to have as much peace as possible. And even if you trust the Lord, it's not like everything's easy, but there is a peace. There is, you put the paddles in the boat and you let the river flow. I was reading through this hymn the other day, and it was like a stanza, and at the end of each stanza it said refrain. And I just kept hearing the Lord say, refrain,
Wow.
refrain. Like, don't start paddling. Don't try and paddle yourself out of this season. The river is flowing. The season will change. But if you start paddling, you're going to wear yourself out. You're going to get out of the season before all the work is done. Or whatever, like, it just refrain. Come to me and refrain, and I will give you rest. And the last thing I'll say just on that season, just in case somebody's in a season that they're not enjoying, you're at that intersection or that midlife, or you're starting in your career and you can't seem to land a job or make any sense of it, or whatever it might be. Like, I just want to encourage you to refrain, and just kind of like live into this moment and rest, and trust the Lord that He knows how to get you to the other side. And when I was looking up at Jesus one time in a prayer time, I couldn't see Him, but I was looking up, just saying like, Jesus, what do you see when you look at me laying down here? And I've always been a very active person, so I'm literally just laying down for the millionth hour of this year, and I'm like, what do you see and what do you say? That's been like this prayer, and I prayed it for about a month before I finally felt like I got an answer from the Lord. And what I felt like Jesus said was, I see you resting for the future. And I was like,
Beautiful.
that is not the way I see it. I'm wasting away. I'm miserable. I'm uncomfortable. I'm unhappy. I want to be doing all these things.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, but I trust your perspective more, that you have me in a season that it's a rest for the future, because I do have long-term goals. Like my kids never got a grandpa, so I want to be a grandpa,
Yeah.
And it sounds funny that's like when people say, what do you want to be when you grow up? Like that's my whole thing right now. I want to be a grandpa, and I'm not trying to put pressure on my kids or anything. But I just want to be a grandpa. I want to be an old guy who's just, loving people, helping people. And so I feel like the Lord's finally helped me to come to terms with saying, okay, He's given me the rest and the reconfiguration and the change in alignment and maybe the gear ratio. Maybe I need to spend less time in fifth and fourth gear and figure out how to do life in third gear. Because I've got a long journey ahead. That's what I felt like the Lord was saying. So whatever season you're in, just look at the Lord and say, hey, what do you see? What do you say? And just keep asking until you get an answer, and then hold on to that for the season. And the river is flowing, though. It is going. You are moving, even if it doesn't feel like it. You are headed where you're supposed to go. So there's a little encouragement for you at the intersection. If you're stuck muddling around like we are to some extent. Okay. Well, any final thoughts before I wrap us up?
No, I was just thinking, this is just gonna be a lot of fun. I'm hopeful if folks are listening and they, again, see themselves in that intersection alongside us, that they, let us know. And again, that you would feel that you're not alone, which I think is like something people could say, but like to really like feel that and let it sink in, I think is important in this season of life. And I'm just looking forward to unpacking, like looking for more wisdom along the path in this wilderness or whatever this is that we're in. And so I'm just grateful to be a small part of this.
That's cool. Well, yeah. So I'm excited. If you do have some wisdom to add or some story to add, or be like, hey, I hear you, or if there was something that stuck out to you, we'd love to hear in some sort of message or email. That you can reach out to us. That would be great. Add your story to this. We're going to have other guests come in. I know of some people that are basically kind of at that intersection as well, and I want to hear their story and what they're doing to help kind of be in the moment, but also figure out how to move forward. We're going to have some people even from Silicon Valley and stuff. We'll try and get some of them to come in and be on this, and we'll just try and get a collection of stories that will hopefully get us some wisdom as we go through. But thank you so much for the time, Anthony. And,
of course.
And I'm excited about doing this. So next week, we're going to dive in again. We'll have some new sermon content that we can discuss. We're going to grab some stuff off of Twitter. We'll get a little bit more of your story and kind of how you're moving forward, how you're thinking about the future and what's next. And hopefully we'll get some wisdom along the way too. All right. Well, we're signing off. God bless.
Thanks, everybody.